Hey, this is Jamey with Stonemaier Games, and in today's Sunday sit-down video, I'm going to talk about instant win conditions in games. This came to mind recently when I was playing Space Base, which I no longer have to show you. I have only a few games to show you, so if you're very visual, you're not going to see a lot in this video today. It's mostly going to be me talking to the screen. But I was playing Space Base, and Space Base has a card that just says you win. In this card, you have to both acquire the card, and then fill it with charge tokens. And if you have 5 charge tokens on it, which is fairly difficult to do, because the card itself, I'm not even sure if the card itself can put charge tokens on itself, so you have to find other ways to get charge tokens there. If you get 5 charge tokens there, you just win the game outright. The game ends and you win. And I am fascinated by cards like this, in particular because when I was playing Space Base, we were playing through the campaign, the Shy Pluto campaign, and I didn't, for a couple games, I didn't even try to go after that card. It doesn't always come out. And then one game I tried it, and I lost the game. I didn't get it. But it was so fun to go after it and just give it a try, to try something outlandish. That's the style of play that I like. I like to try something that's a little weird and just see how it goes, and I don't care if I win or lose. But it was exciting that I came pretty close to pulling it off. It was created a very memorable moment in that game. I remember that specific session of the game because I tried the you win condition. So I thought I would explore that in other games, and so I put some calls out there to get thoughts from other people about games that have this type of instant win condition, and yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about today. And the first one that comes to mind, and this isn't a ranked list, this is just a random list. The first one that comes to mind that doesn't quite meet this condition, but I think is worth mentioning, is Hearts. Hearts is a classic card game where one of the things that you can do in the game is to shoot the moon. Typically in Hearts, you are trying not to get heart cards, but if you shoot the moon, you're trying to get all of the heart cards. It's a big catch-up mechanism in the game, and it doesn't quite fit on this list because you don't actually win the game if you get all the heart cards. Rather, you get a lot of points, and you move yourself towards potentially winning the game. It's also a big catch-up mechanism, but you don't instantly win. I think in Hearts you usually play to like 400, 500 points, and shooting the moon I think gives you 100 points, so it gives you a big boost, but you don't actually win the game. I might be way off on those numbers. So a lot of these, I think of these mechanisms as shoot the moon mechanisms, even though this is really like a you win mechanism that I'm talking about today. Let me start out with a visual, because that's a little bit more interesting than me just talking at the screen. The first is in Yedo. And again, this is a bit of a slight exception to this rule, but one of my favorite things about Yedo is that there's a card in the game called Kill the Shogun. And if you pull off this card, it's a black card, so it's the most difficult type of mission in the game. And it requires, you can see all this stuff that it requires, all this stuff. It requires all this stuff. And not only all this stuff, but it also, it takes pretty much everything. You have to work towards this over many, many rounds to pull this off. But if you do, you get 14 points, you get some objective cards over here, and it says the game ends immediately after this round. So this isn't quite a you win card, but if you manage to pull this off, you control when the game ends, so that's in your hands, and you're also getting 14 points, which is a ton of points in this game. So you are probably winning the game if you pull off the Kill the Shogun mission in Yedo. I'm going to do a bit of a design discussion later. I might bring this back up, but this is very close to a you win condition. Next on the list, I already mentioned Space Base. Shards of Infinity. This is one that I haven't played, but someone mentioned it. Apparently, if you get to level 30, Shards of Infinity is a deck building game where you can level up over the course of the game, levels I think 1 through 30. If you get to level 30, you get something called, it's your mastery is at level 30, and you just get infinite attack damage. So I don't know exactly how this works. I haven't played the game, but I think the idea is if you are at the top level of mastery, you just win the game automatically. That's pretty cool. There's also King of New York. I played King of Tokyo. I haven't played King of New York. The games are fairly similar. But apparently there's a card in King of New York called the Pain Bow that just says you win the game. Magic I'm going to come back to because there are lots of examples in Magic the Gathering. I'm going to end with that because there are tons of examples there. In Corinth, another game that I haven't played but someone mentioned on social media, in Corinth, it's a dice rolling game, and if all 9 dice happen to roll the same face, you just win the game. I think in Corinth that this is an extreme rarity that this actually happens, but I think it's kind of cool that the designer put in there, if you happen to do this crazy thing, you win the game. In Codenames, this is an interesting twist. In Codenames, which I actually do, I should have pulled that off the shelf. I do have a copy of Codenames. In Codenames, you can win if the other team does something, which is if they accidentally identify an assassin card. If they guess the assassin card, they lose automatically, and because it's a team game, a one-on-one, a two-on-two, one versus the other, you automatically win. And that actually applies to pretty much any two-player game, but instant win conditions that are different than the primary win condition. And I should emphasize that. Yeah, these things I'm talking about today are instant win conditions that are different than the primary way of winning the game. So that's Codenames, the assassin tile. You typically don't win that way. You win other ways in Codenames, not by identifying the assassin, but it can happen fairly often. The other visual example I have is Seven Wonders Duel. This is one of my favorite examples of this instant win condition, because the primary way of winning Seven Wonders Duel is to get victory points. But there are two other instant win conditions. One is if you advance on this military track, which goes back and forth, you start in the middle, and as you conquer the other person's territories, essentially, abstractly, you move the attack token along this track. And if you get to the end of the track, you instantly win the game. Seven Wonders Duel also has the science conditions here. So if you end up getting a full set of science cards, you instantly win the game. I think this works really well in Seven Wonders because there's this wonderful push and pull on this track. Like, you may not really want to focus on military, but you can't completely give up on military and let the other person get all the military cards because they will just instantly win the game. And it adds a really nice level of interaction to the game too, because you are constantly paying attention to the other cards the player is taking and where they are on these instant win goals. What else? I'm looking at my other screen because I've got all the magic cards pulled up over there. I'm excited to talk about that. In Root, a few people reminded me that Root has an instant win condition that's not the primary win condition of getting 30 points, which is if you start your turn with all four corners of the board controlled, or sometimes it's like all bunny clearings, it's all of something, and you have at least 10 victory points at the time, and you also give up the potential for winning a victory point game, you can potentially win the game. So it's a weird little kind of a catch-up mechanism in a way, where if you don't think you even have a shot at getting 30 victory points in Root, you can go after this alternate victory condition and potentially get that. I've never tried it in Root. I've honestly kind of ignored that when I played Root because it's a little bit above my head in terms of how well I understand Root with all the asymmetry going on in that game. But I think it's clever that they built in this catch-up mechanism, instant win condition. Last, before I get to the magic cards, is Twilight Struggle. Twilight Struggle has a game that says this costs you 6 victory points, so pay 6 victory points and then end the game. So it's not necessarily a you-win condition, but it's a card that you would only ever play if you were at least 7 victory points ahead of the next player. And so it's a great card that you can have and be ready to play in case you ever get to that point of 7 victory points. You then play the card, you go back 6 victory points, but you're still 1 point ahead of the other player, and you instantly win the game. Let's check out Magic. So I'm going to look at my other monitor here at some of the Magic cards, because in Magic, the primary way of winning is to reduce your opponent's health to 0. But there are cards that work around that. There's also the idea of decking your opponent, which is when your opponent goes to draw a card and they cannot because their deck is empty. That is very rare, but it's also kind of built into the core construct of Magic as a win condition. But I think even more fun are cards that that are just kind of out there in terms of the ways they help you win the game. So I'm going to go through a few of these. There's Barren Glory, which says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no permanents other than Barren Glory and you have no cards in hand, you win the game. These are kind of the types of cards that you would build your deck around. There is Near-Death Experience. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly one life, you win the game. That's pretty cool too. So you kind of want to get as low to 0 life as possible without losing. If you get that exact 1 life, you win. There's Mortal Combat. At the beginning of your upkeep, if 20 or more creatures are in your graveyard, you win the game. So you might make a deck around that card and then all other creature cards. Everything else is a creature card in your deck. There's Door to Nothingness. You tap it for 10 mana, 10 specific mana, and it says sacrifice Door to Nothingness. Target player loses the game. So in a 2-player game of Magic, you would instantly win the game. There's a Laboratory Maniac. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. That's pretty cool. If you draw a card while your library has no cards, so you're trying to essentially deck yourself. Maybe you're playing a deck where you're getting all players to draw a lot of cards. That would be something to do with Laboratory Maniac. Battle of Wits. This is kind of an older classic card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 200 or more cards in your library, you win the game. So you might build a giant deck and kind of hope that you get Battle of Wits, or find a good way of finding Battle of Wits and hoping it doesn't get countered. Cruel Ultimatum, which costs 7 specific mana types, just says you win the game. That's it. You play the card, you win the game if you can afford it. Okay, here's Biovisionary. At the beginning of the end step, if you control 4 or more creatures named Biovisionary, you win the game. So if you can get all 4 cards exactly of that name out into play, you just win the game. Let me see if there are any others. Okay, here's one. Yeah, this is weird. Okay, the Helix Pinnacle. It has an activation cost of X. It's an enchantment. It says X. Put X tower counters on Helix Pinnacle. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, you win the game. I see that being very difficult to do. Here's one. Here, I'll do one last one because I think from the most recent set. It's called Happily Ever After. When Happily Ever After enters the battlefield, each player gains 5 life and draws a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, there are 6 or more card types among permanents you control, and or in your graveyard, and your life total is greater than or equal to your starting life total, you win the game. There's one like this too. That's I think it's like if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. Yeah, pretty cool. I love the creativity in Magic that they've created cards that do this. And that takes me into my design discussion a little bit, which is how to design a card or a mechanism in a game that is a instant win condition that is different than the primary win condition. I have tried it. I tried it with Tapestry. There was an original civilization in some of the early prototypes that had an instant win condition, and it didn't playtest well. Playtesters didn't really like that the game could end all of a sudden, even though it was visibly out on the table. All players could see that you were doing it, and I think it was because the other players didn't feel like they had an opportunity to stop the other player from doing it. Like in Hearts, it's not possible to necessarily stop the other player from taking all the hearts, but you have information, you have the possibility of doing certain things that can make it harder for that player to do so. I think the perfect example of how to design an instant win condition, other than Seven Wonders Duel, I think is the perfect way to integrate it seamlessly into the game. It works so well. Like the whole game is kind of built around that idea that you have a lot of interaction in terms of the cards that you select, the cards that you leave for your opponents, it's just brilliantly built into the game. But for a one card example, I think Space Base does it really well because the card that says you win comes up in a public tableau, so any player can be the one to claim that card if they can afford it. 2, so any player has the opportunity to claim that opportunity. 2, it takes multiple turns, so you can kind of see it coming. It essentially puts a timer on the game. You see that this player put a timer on the game, and you have X number of turns basically until they're going to win the game for you to instead end the game and win the game. And 3, it's very difficult to do. It requires you to put a lot of effort into what your strategy is so you can accomplish the you win card, to the point that it diverges you away from the primary way of winning the game, which I think is the key thing, one of the key things of these instant win conditions, that they aren't necessarily seamlessly built into the core construct of the game. They forced you into an alternate strategy. So it's a full-on choice. You are deciding, okay, I am almost giving up on normal victory points in Space Base. I'm going to go after this one thing instead and go all out and see if I can do it. And if you don't accomplish it, it's pretty much on you. Like, it's not anyone else's fault except for your own if you didn't do it. But I walk away from Space when I've tried that. I felt responsible for my own loss, but I also had a lot of fun doing it because it was fully in my control to give it a try. It wasn't in the other player's realm to decide whether or not I was going to win that game versus that alternate win condition. So I think that works really well too. Yeah, but overall, I think it's just pretty tough to design. So I think the space-based model, the Seven Wonders Duel model, I think those are two good models to think about if you're going to put a you-win condition in the game. And I think it was tough to put together this list. There aren't a lot of games that do this, so I think it's fairly tough to do, and it probably doesn't belong in most games. I think it's because it's so tough to integrate, so tough to balance and make it work. But if you could put it in your game, I'm going to be excited about it. I love that alternate way of winning that goes beyond normal like faction asymmetry in a game. That it is a complete like you win condition that's exciting. It can serve as a catch up mechanism. It can serve as just a fun alternate strategy. I love this mechanism. This concept of you win the game instantly. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm sure it's a fairly divisive topic. Perhaps you really don't like this type of mechanism at all. I'd love to hear why you do or don't like it, and if you have any favorite games where that has this mechanism that I haven't mentioned here, or if you have any good stories about times where you went after an instant win condition that is vastly different from the primary way of winning the game, and you have a memorable story to come out of it. I think it does this type of mechanism has a greater chance of creating memorable moments and stories than standard win conditions in games, which is one of the reasons why I really like it. So I'd love to hear those stories in the comments as well. I think that's it. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Take care.